Hello, my name is Monica Rochon, and we are live from the University of South Florida for our first Real Talk Live, produced by Housing and Residential Education. Our motto is the best place to live, best place to work, and the best place to learn. The Real Talk series provides an opportunity to learn and engage in dialogue around issues of social justice. By creating a space to reflect and critically discuss personal and cultural lived experiences, both locally and globally, it's our goal to explore world's one view through their identity, cultural rules, life experiences, and bias. The premiere episode of Real Talk Live will focus on gender identity and sexuality. Remember that we are live for viewers on campus and around the world, so if you have a question to ask through the YouTube channel, please ask it and we will answer it live. And with that, I would like to thank our two guests this evening for joining us, and we were going to start with brief introductions. So Dr. Wendland, can you tell us who you are, what you do at USF, and why this topic is important to you?
Sure, my name is Dr. Milton Wendland. I teach in the Department of Women's and Gender Studies here at USF. I teach courses that range from Introduction to Women's and Gender Studies all the way up to Feminist Theory, but I specialize in courses like LGBTQ cultures and queer film and TV. I came to USF to teach in this department after serving several years as an attorney, where some of my cases dealt with gender and sexual identity issues. Not all of them, but some of them.
Great. Yeah. Dr. Cruz, can you share with us who you are, what you do at USF, and why this topic is important to you?
Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Daniel Cruz-Ramirez de Arellano. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, but I've been stateside now for 8 years. I teach in the Department of Chemistry. I do general chemistry, organic chemistry, but I'm also very much involved with initiatives that seek to increase the number of underrepresented students in science. And not only focused on racial minorities, me being Latino, but guess what? I'm also gay. And I'm interested in also increasing the number of LGBT people who choose science and engineering careers as well. So I'm involved in all sorts of initiatives that deal with that.
Awesome. Thank you. So to start off, what are some strategies that you both use to create a welcoming and safe environment in your classrooms?
Go ahead.
All right. Well, there's several things I do. First of all, I introduce who I am, and I am very much open with my identity and who I am. When I was an undergrad, I never really saw a professor who was out and proud, and I feel like those role models are important. So now that I am in a position where I am the professor in the room, I have no qualms in saying who I am, where I'm from, and how I identify. And being open like that, I feel contributes to creating that already inclusive atmosphere in the classroom. But I also explicitly say it in the syllabus. I have this inclusion statement that not only do I put in the syllabus, but I say it in front of the room the very first day, to make sure that students understand that no matter how they identify and what elements of their identity they bring with themselves to the classroom, that they are welcome as such, that they are included, and that I value who they are and what they bring to the table. So sometimes something as simple as just being explicit with your acceptance and your allyship can make a huge difference.
Thank you.
In my classroom, since I teach lesbian and gay studies, women's studies, feminist studies, people sort of already make a lot of assumptions about what my classes are going to be like. So I have to also do some of what Dr. Cruz does, but I also work really hard myself, because I come from my own position as a white man, etc., to be careful about pronoun usage, to be careful about assuming things about people's students' backgrounds because of the way they appear, being careful to not assume that just because a student female presents that I ask her about a boyfriend. She may have multiple boyfriends, girlfriends, etc. So I try to always monitor my initial interactions with students to sort of lay that groundwork, and that also models that for other students in my courses.
Thank you both. I think both of those strategies are worth celebrating. And so how do you have conversations with other faculty members and maybe even other staff members about creating inclusive environments for students on our campus, particularly students who identify with the LGBT community?
Well, one thing, these conversations do come up at faculty meetings and stuff like that. And one thing I encourage my colleagues to do is to attend safe zone training sessions. I don't know if all of you are aware, but the Office of Multicultural Affairs here at USF has this amazing program, and I'm a part of it. I am one of the trainers, and it's called Safe Zone Training, right? And it's a 3-hour thing, and it's open to faculty, staff, and students, and it's basically a crash course that explains what LGBTQ means, what that type of experience is like, and then it provides specific resources that help make students feel more welcome, more safe, more included. So for a faculty member or a staff person who feels like they know nothing, right? And they don't know where to start, that's a great place to start. You can go to the website and sign up for a training and you'll get the basics in there. So for faculty and staff who are concerned with that type of thing, it's a great place to go get some great skills and resources, and you'll probably see me there, so hey.
Cool. Thank you.
Most of my work in my department, we're already pretty sensitive to some of those issues, so I try to hold myself out campus-wide through the Office of Multicultural Affairs, through housing, through our Center for Teaching Excellence, et cetera, sort of a resource that new and experienced faculty can come to and ask those sort of sensitive questions like, I got that email from a student who wants me to use a different pronoun, I don't know how to handle it. I can help you handle that, and so can lots of other resources on our campus. I'm also pretty free about sharing my syllabi and the statements I use in my syllabi, my teaching lessons, and I get a lot of emails from colleagues in departments that you wouldn't necessarily expect would be concerned about LGBTQ issues or feminist or gender issues, who are saying, you know, I want to include this, but I don't know how, and my department doesn't have a resource for me, can you help? And so a lot of my work is that way, through individual sorts of emails and activism.
Great, that's awesome.
Yeah, but it's important if faculty and staff want to be inclusive and that type of stuff. Often it starts with education. They want to be inclusive, but they don't even know what they need to be inclusive of, you know? So taking that first step where you educate yourself and you read a little bit and you learn what all the terms in the acronym mean, you know, because the acronym keeps growing, right? That's an amazing first step, you know, just getting that education so that when you hear these terms being used by your students, you don't get surprised and you know what they're talking about.
Absolutely.
I have to second the safe zone thing. Almost every American campus has this program, and it's 2, maybe 3, sometimes a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, and it is the place that even I have attended this. Even though I teach this, I'm sort of a professional gay, since this is what I teach and how I live my life, but even I can take the safe zone training, and every time I do it, I come out of it with something else like, oh yeah, that's something I need to focus on, or that's the new lingo that my students are using that an old person like me hasn't quite cued into yet. So Safe Zone is the way to start this process.
Absolutely, and it's an interactive training and we do all sorts of activities and we really get in there, you know, and it's obviously an environment where you're encouraged to bring whatever questions you have and we do our best to answer them. Where there are no bad questions, you know, so please sign up, take the trainings, they're great, and you'll get so many resources and tools for sure.
That sounds great, and the inclusion statement that you mentioned in your syllabi, I think is, I mean, unheard of from my experience in college. I think that is so powerful for our students on campus. Like you said, role modeling the way to, that could open up a relationship with a student that just, you know, they can be so thankful just for that inclusive statement. So I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, no, you read studies and you read about visibility, right? How there was no one who would identify in that way in the department in which they were. And, you know, since I'm more in the science engineering side of things, you hear it even more, you know, it's male dominated and you're not supposed to talk about your feelings and it's all need to be empirical. And no, we're humans with emotions and feelings and with levels of identity that just because we're scientists or engineers, we don't stop being human. You know what I mean? So it's important to include that as well. So in the inclusion statement, not only do I include stuff like, you know, ethnicity and race and sexual orientation and gender identity, but also, you know, socioeconomic status, whether you're a native speaker of English or not, whether you're a first generation college student or not, regardless of, you know, differently abled, regardless of the elements of your identity, you're included in my classroom. And I hope that that is certainly the case for the other classrooms.
Yeah, that's great. You bring up a good point with even the intersections of identity when we think about gender identity and sexuality and other identities that our students have or maybe not be so in touch with. So what are some of the issues or challenges or maybe even the fears that you have in your classrooms when you're interacting with students?
Fears.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm afraid. I would say, you know, there's always that concern of how others will perceive you, or whether you'll be, you know, judged or perceived in a certain way due to publicly disclosing just who you are. But I think that when you choose to be a college professor, you pretty much have to throw that type of thing out the window and just be authentic and be who you are. But you know, particularly again in like science classrooms and stuff like that, like I said earlier, there's this expectation of the separation of identities, where your professional life and what you do in the lab has nothing to do with your personal life. And I feel like we lose so much there. If people are allowed to be their authentic selves 100% of the time, they're more comfortable and problem solving occurs more efficiently, in a more productive way. And the more diverse the group of people that's working on a problem, the more different perspectives you have. You can tackle the problem in different ways and just better things happen, you know? So just because you're in a certain field, it shouldn't be the case that you should not disclose who you are. Not at all.
I'm a big believer in my classes of failing forward. So in my courses, I tend not to grade the product, the final product, so much as the process, and that counts as well in discussion sections or when we're having a discussion in class. So I often like to use myself as a model for that. So I often in class misspeak, or I'll use a term that I didn't mean to use, etc. So rather than trying to gloss over that, we just stop and we say, oh, I can't believe I just said that. What I meant to say was this, and that's a reflection of how all of us are imbricated in all of these sorts of biases, etc., that circulate in our society. Even people who deal with this stuff, think about it, talk about it, research it every day. And I think it produces this way for my students to sort of also have those little stumbles and blocks, and to, instead of thinking those, oh my God, I must be a horrible racist, bigot, whatever, to think, okay, I made a bad or unprofessional language choice. What's the better word? How can I learn about this? Where can I find out about that? That's the heart of learning. If you come into a classroom and you already think you know everything, whether you're the professor or the student, you've already sort of lost the game, because the whole point is to encounter the things that you don't know. And that counts just as much for professors like us as it does for the first year student who's a fresh person.
Wow. Dr. Wendland, that's wonderful. That really pushes the conversation and dialogue around and makes your students feel like it's okay for me to make a mistake. So we actually have some questions coming in, and I would like to ask both of our guests, why do we legitimize mental illness instead of seeking help for anyone who might be going through something? What is the advantage of letting some people pretend that they are a different gender?
The advantage of letting people pretend they are a different
How would you
gender?
respond to that?
It seems like maybe the question is suggesting that gender is so fluid that we can just put it on, wake up in the morning and choose a gender, whatever that might be. And indeed, some of us can, because we can dress up and we can play act, and lots of us cross gender lines all the time. I mean, if you think to Halloween or Mardi Gras, lots of men dress up as women or women dress up as men. That's a whole separate thing. That's playing with gender. But when we're talking about gender identity and gender expression, we're talking about something that some of us might think of as really heartfelt or soulful, if you believe in a soul, but something that's so sort of circulating through your body and your psyche that it's undeniable. In the same way that I think of my maleness as sort of undeniable, or my my whiteness, or being from Kansas, etc. It's just a truth that I hold true and that I express. So I think one of the things that we need to do to educate ourselves and others is to recognize that gender is this social construct that we can all play with, but for some of us, that playing with is much more deeply held and is an ongoing process that can feel like a disidentification with yourself or a conflict. And so to bring those into alignment is sort of the way all of us want to self-actualize or self-authenticate. So I think that's really the heart of the question that we're being asked.
Yeah, I would add that, you know, the whatever term you want to use to address it, I would say the bottom line is that we should respect people's right to self-identify in the way that makes them feel the most comfortable and the most happy. And if it is something that is not damaging anyone in any way, why would we deprive someone from their happiness? Even if it's something that you don't understand or that it doesn't quite click in your mind, I hope that letting other people be happy can click in your mind. So whether you want to call it a mental illness, I wouldn't, but whether you want to call it that or whether you just want to call it gender identity, let's try and be respectful of the way other people identify and live their lives, and just be happy with each other.
Great, thank you. So our next question, how does a safe space allow people to progress? So I'm thinking a safe space is even an affinity space for LGBT community. You talked about intersections of identity, so affinity space for anyone, but particularly around gender and sexuality. How does that space allow us to progress?
I think safe spaces, particularly like in a classroom, sometimes get misinterpreted as spaces where you can't offend anyone or ask any questions. Safe doesn't mean that you won't have a feeling of anger or confusion or excitement or nervousness. Safe means this is a place where you can address that question and get a legitimate answer. So for me, safe spaces do that sort of work. Affinity spaces I think of slightly differently. Sometimes you need a space where you can connect with people who share an identity with you. For instance, a racial, a religious, an ethnic, a sexual identity, etc. But I think the power of those too isn't that you go there and suddenly you have these lifelong friendships and you're exactly the same. I think the power of affinity spaces is that you meet because maybe you're all lesbians or gay or transgender, and then you realize, oh, we're all lesbian or gay or transgender, but we're also raced and classed, etc. So we find that nodal point where we can make contacts with one another while recognizing our individual and group differences. So I think those are really powerful because they do what I was talking about before. They give you that space to sort of fail forward, to experiment, to work on process, rather than pretending to be a product of I am absolutely perfectly accepting or I'm a complete bigot. It's that middle space which is always most important to me in my thinking.
Yeah, and you know, there are people who genuinely feel like they have absolutely nowhere to go with their questions, absolutely nowhere to go with their inquiries, with their feelings of inadequacy. So showcasing and visibly publishing, right, the existence of a safe space lets them know that there is this location or this individual that they can go to and let their guard down a little bit and just ask the questions they have, and that they'll be heard. Even if even if the person in the safe space doesn't have the answer, just listening to the other individual and letting them get it out of their system can be powerful in itself. So that's why I feel like safe spaces can be very important, because it's a place where they can go and be heard when you feel like no one wants to hear you, which is when you need it the most, right?
Absolutely. I'm gonna kind of ask a question about pronouns and the importance of them. I think that some people may believe that pronouns might be damaging to someone else, but I think he and she has been used for a long time. So I don't know which pronouns they're referring to that might be damaging, whether that's they or, you know, there are many other pronouns that people would prefer to be or would like to be called by. So what is the importance of pronouns? What does that mean to someone?
Pronouns in some way, he, she, it, they, them, whatever, in some way sort of erase who we are, right? Because you just become this stand-in word.
Generic, yeah.
Right. And so it can just be like, who cares? But think about the times that you've been mispronounced or misraced or misgendered or missexed or something, and it sort of stabs you in this weird place. So the power of pronouns is that at the very time they're sort of generalizing you, they are identifying you so specifically. And so I think the power of pronouns for those who are sort of resistant to when a person wants to alter pronouns or use they, them, their, etc., is often not about the person who's asking for the pronoun change. It's often about my own discomfort with, one, being scared I might misuse a pronoun and offend someone, or two, just not understanding why someone might just want to be like everyone else. And when you step out of that positionality and you sort of ask yourself why a person might do that, and you sort of forgive yourself if you misuse a pronoun, or you ask why, then it becomes much easier. So to me, pronouns are the most generic parts of language, but at the same time, the most sort of heart-rending or piercing parts of language, and that's why they're important.
Yeah, it's a way to show respect. It's a way to show the individual that you hear them and you acknowledge their self-identification and that you have no problem with it. So that's why, you know, I would encourage everyone to, if someone else identifies their pronouns in a certain way, to respect that. If you're privileged enough that you've never had to specify your pronouns to anyone else, then maybe you don't understand how it can feel when it doesn't go how you would expect. And if that's the case, great. But for some people, that's not the case, you know? So if they specify their pronouns, use them, because, like I said earlier, it's about respecting the individual's right to self-identify. And again, even if it doesn't quite make sense in your mind, or if it doesn't click, it doesn't have to. Respect should, right? So just to acknowledge the other person's humanness, humanity, and respect them, just comply, you know?
Great, thank you. I'd like to just let our audience know if you have any questions, please raise your hands during the show and we'll bring a mic over to you. So something else I want to ask you all. So you have shared with us your faculty role on campus, some great information of how you provide an inclusive environment in your classrooms. So how are you engaged outside of your faculty role in the community, in the Tampa Bay community, or maybe even just on campus too?
Well, all right, yes. So, you know, there's only a certain amount of time we have available, right? So my role at USF is mostly instructional. I mostly teach and design the curriculum and do stuff like that. But I wanted to do more, right? So that's how I got involved with this research project called Queer in STEM. It's a nationwide study that's been done. We're now on a second round of a survey, getting, you know, data and stuff. And we basically want to describe the queer experience in science and engineering to first of all show that there are people who identify with all sorts of identifications in all sorts of academic fields, right? Like sometimes people want to be stereotypical and think that the gays just do drama and theater and I don't know, and that's great and I like it, but it's not all that we do, right? There's gay people everywhere in every single field, right? So we want to shed some light on that, but then of course take it a step further and just understand what the experience has been like in the workforce, and of course how we can make it better. What workplace policies are currently in place that work to help individuals feel more included and more safe in their workplace, and what is lacking still that we should add in order to make people feel comfortable. You know, it's part of that effort of increasing the number of underrepresented people. Beyond that, I'm involved with the Safe Zone trainings I mentioned earlier. I conduct those trainings, and it's a really rewarding experience to feel like you're giving people all across campus, even if it's just some tools, you're still giving them tools to make USF every single day a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more safe, a little bit better. Right, so to feel like you're making that sort of difference is amazing, and it's something that I feel like is worth it to work in. You know, thinking about the community at large. I don't know. I have so many things I'd love to do, but you know, time, and you have to see what you have time for. But for now, that's what I'm focusing on, and we'll see what other things I can help out with in the future. You know, I got invited to speak here, so maybe something else will come around, you know?
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I second Dr. Cruz's comments. I serve on a lot of committees at the university, and I'm always trying to put myself out there. But I want to focus on one other little thing. Second wave feminism, which is the feminism between about roughly the 50s into the maybe 70s, had this adage called the personal is political, and the reverse of it, the political is personal. And so I really like to believe that my life, almost every bit of it, not just my career, but everything that I do sort of emanates out to other people. So for example, tomorrow is my first anniversary with my husband, and when we were planning our wedding, we have a lot of friends, conservative and liberal and gay and straight and all sorts, and we wanted to be very sure that our wedding wasn't exactly a teachable moment because we were there to have fun and get married, right? But we wanted it to be something that all of our friends could learn more about the things that we care deeply about, our feminist values, our progressive values for LGBT people, et cetera, et cetera. And so for every part of our wedding, we shaped it so that it would fit those values. And indeed, afterwards, the 100 and some odd guests, 130 guests, almost to a person said, whoa, I'd never been to a wedding that was that like individual and unique and enjoyable, and I hadn't thought of things this way, and it was this really amazing chance for us to take something that could have just been about us and, you know, our flowers, our cake, our pictures, and it became this amazing experience for all of our friends and created this community. And then they all flew home to Alaska and Utah and New York and wherever else they came from, and hopefully shared some of those lessons and elements. So I think that sometimes just living your life and being open about it and doing the small things in life can have this really major ripple effect. I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah, merely existing in an open way can be a form of activism. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it seems like it draws people to you, like
Yes.
your aura, your energy projects. So we have some more questions coming in, and all the questions so far have been really great. I encourage you all to keep them coming. This question, there has been a great deal of debate about the use of the trans plus or the trans asterisk as an umbrella term as opposed to trans or transgender, et cetera. Can you shed some light on this debate? What are your feelings on it? Maybe even some of your research might attach to it.
Well, there's certainly being an evolution of the terms and what it means, and people trying to come up with terms that are more and more inclusive of the different manifestations of what being trans can mean, right? Because initially, when we first learned these terms, you go like, okay, transgender, so they were assigned to be a boy at birth, but now they identify as a girl, or they were assigned a girl and now they identify as a boy. And initially you think that that is the only definition that trans can have. But as you get deeper and deeper, you start to see that you're still in the binary, if you think about it like that, right? Trans not only necessarily means just that, identified as one way and then switching, but it can mean many other things, right? Where it's not necessarily about which of the two classic genders you identify with, but it's more about that fluidity, right? And that not conforming to these definitions that society wants to impose on you. So I feel like it's a good thing that we're trying to come up with these umbrella terms. Of course, we don't want it to be so generic that we erase the particular experiences of individuals, but it goes to show you precisely the huge amount of diversity and possibilities that there can be regarding to gender. And that's why we strive for inclusive terms, because so many possibilities are there and we want to respect them all and include them all.
I 100% second that. It's not unique to gender or sexual identity. We see this with racial politics, religious politics. We see it with regular politics. I mean, who's a Republican? What counts as a Democrat? Whatever. And I think the problem with those battles comes when we dig so deeply and we entrench ourselves so deeply in one position that we refuse to listen to the other people who might be advocating for a different position, rather than, once again, going to that middle point, looking at, okay, how can we capture your particular idea, my particular idea, and your particular idea, and share common goals while still maintaining my identity and your identity? It's possible. We know it's possible because we do it every day with our families and in all sorts of groups. I think the question is, are we going to be generous enough with our own identities and our listening to let everyone exist in that space?
That's great. I think since we're on the topic of trans students or just the trans umbrella, I was thinking about some things that are worth celebrating within the LGBT community, and maybe specific in higher education or specific to our campus, of things that you might know, whether that's through Canvas or the process for a student to change their name, whatever the case may be. For our department in housing, I know one of our wins is adding transitioning to the housing application. Something so small, but it's not just female and male, it's transitioning. And that might not be enough, but it's something and it's worth celebrating. So what are some things that you think are worth celebrating as faculty instructors?
I think one of the things is students themselves banding together and telling faculty and administration and student affairs what they need and want, rather than those things coming down from the people up here.
Yes.
I think that's super essential. And one of those things was we need a mechanism to change our names in the official system. I don't think that's been put into place at USF, but there is a mechanism in Canvas where a student can change their name, which makes it much easier for professors and GAs and other students to interact with that person using that person's preferred gender identity. It's a little switch, and it's made a world of difference to some of my students. I think a couple of other things are the brave students who have sort of pioneered some talks with professors and been willing to put themselves and their identities and their well, really their success on the line to say, this doesn't work for me in your department or your class or in this part of the university, and to really advocate for their own change. I think it's really forced some of us who are in faculty and student affairs and administration to say, we need to attend to this because we need to retain good students, and these students are telling us what they want. So for me, it's that grassroots students themselves sort of telling the university what to do and shaping their own experiences. It's not the only way, just one important way.
Yeah, things to celebrate the mere existence of these student organizations that are geared towards queer students and giving them this space where they can address these issues and make their voice heard. That is definitely something worth celebrating. Going back to the Office of Multicultural Affairs, we have this one staff member who's been hired to particularly tend to LGBT student affairs and issues and stuff like that. We had one previously, then we lost that person. We were looking for a new one, and we recently hired Maria Merrill. So I'm not sure what her official title is, but it's something in the lines of LGBT coordinator, student affairs, stuff like that. And basically, it's an individual who's been brought here to tend to those situations, you know? So it's something worth celebrating for sure, because we have someone championing these issues and making sure that students get their voices heard in the higher ups in the administration, you know?
I'm really glad you brought up Maria as a resource. And
absolutely.
And just in this conversation alone, I mean, there's four of us. I mean, Maria plus the three of us, plus so many other people. There's not just one person. And I think that is a great message, because it's all of our responsibilities to make sure that our campus is inclusive and students are feeling safe here. So thank you.
Yeah, our students can certainly approach us, but if you're not sure who you can approach, Google USF OMA Maria Merrill. Shoot her an email. She's lovely. I love her.
She is. I'm really glad that you put that plug in there. So we have some more questions. So can you all speak more about the intersections of identity around gender identity and sexuality, specifically in relation to power, privilege, and oppression?
Well, it's a tough question because it's very large.
Yes.
But one of the things that often happens, I hope this is responsive to the question, is that those of us who might be cisgender, like I am, but also be gay or lesbian or bi, have a difficult time sometimes understanding gender identity and expression issues, and can often be some of the sort of worst perpetrators of transphobia, because we think, oh, well, we're LGBT, you're LGBT, so we're all on the same page, rather than listening to those folks. So for me, one of the things that's really important is to always be aware of my privilege. I have a great deal of privilege in the sense that I'm white and I'm well educated and my socioeconomic status is quite high, but it hasn't always been. I come from a working class family in a small town of 800 people in Kansas. So I'm particularly attentive, for instance, to first generation college students and the difficulties that presents, for instance, when your parents have never gone to college, don't understand financial aid processes, et cetera. So I think I'm sort of getting a little bit off track from the original question, but I think one of the keys is recognizing that those groups, those affinity groups, those umbrellas, are just that. They're umbrellas. You can put them down over at the side and still everyone's going to get rained on. So what we need to do is remember that the umbrella is just this sort of fake construct for us to come together, but we still need to remember that being an African American lesbian is not the same as being a Cubano gay man, which is not the same as being a kid from Kansas who's gay but who's also white and a lawyer. And if you can remember all of that, then it opens you up to being able to think, okay, you got this and that's going, but this part seems like it's probably a problem for you given things that are going on in Tampa Bay or the US or at the university, et cetera.
Yeah, no, the acknowledgement of what we call intersectionality, right? Which might sound like a fancy word, but it really just means that an individual can have different aspects of their identity that might be considered to be underrepresented or minority at the same time. And those levels of identity influence each other and determine how you're perceived by the world and how you interact with the world. So, like he said, you know, it's not the same for a lesbian woman who also happens to be African American versus one who might not be, right? There's levels of privilege, levels of identity, and the important thing is to educate ourselves, and so because the more we read about it, the more we're aware of them and the more we can do something about it.
I want to add one thing. I think one of the ways that gender identity expression and sexual orientation, affection orientation have really intersected for me is when I was growing up and coming out as a little gay boy, gay man, I was deeply, horribly afraid of feminine gay men, drag queens, anybody who crossed gender boundaries, because I had for so long suffered under being told those things, being called all the names you can think of, right? And it wasn't until I sort of met from some of my drag friends and then also some of my transgender friends that they sort of helped me like deal with my own misogyny and my own gender phobia, even as a gay man. I mean, I was out living this very fabulous gay life as a gay man in college, and yet still processing my gender in a different place from my sexual orientation. And it wasn't until I learned how those can intersect in a really remarkable, casual, doesn't have to be a freak out way that I sort of relaxed in to allowing the space for my trans and gender queer friends to exist and addressing my own sort of misogyny and gender phobia.
See, but a lot of it came from meeting these other people. Like if you don't go out and meet these people and meet them where they are in their spaces, this learning won't happen, you know? So it isn't until you make the conscious decision of I'm gonna go meet these people where they are, I'm gonna talk to them, I'm gonna listen to them and what their experience has been like, that the education starts happening. Because a similar thing happened to me too. You know, I was raised very conservative, and these topics were not something that could even be spoken about, you know, so I knew nothing, right? So when you start meeting people, you meet people who are trans and identify as heterosexual, people who are trans and identify as gay, people who are trans and refuse to have their sexual orientation have a label. You see all these different dimensions and possibilities, and that's when you start getting it. That's when you put a real face, a real person, instead of just reading a list of labels. When you meet people who use those labels, it humanizes them. And you understand that in the end, it's just about respecting them and letting them be happy and letting us be happy.
And it humanizes you, because here's the thing. Usually when we feel fear or we encounter difference, we don't want to encounter it because we don't know how to process it, right? And we're afraid of offending, or we just think, oh my God, that's so strange. And then we start worrying about ourselves. But here's the thing, the more you encounter difference, you might think, who am I now? What if tomorrow I'm trans, or if I'm gay, or if I wake up straight or something? But actually just the opposite happens. The more difference you encounter, the more sure you become of your own identity at any particular moment, and the more comfortable you become in your skin rather than less comfortable.
And the more comfortable you become in acknowledging that other people are comfortable in that different skin.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'd offer one other thing. If sometimes it can be scary to go to a meeting or go to meet someone who's different from you. But we have a ton of resources on campus. Every campus does. I mean, this week alone, there are probably 50 speakers, workshops facilitated, things, roundtables. There's this. So just attend one. Just go sit in the back of the auditorium and listen to someone talk about an experience that isn't your experience. 1 hour on a Sunday night like this, and your life is going to be a little bit larger than it was an hour ago. And so sometimes things like that can be really powerful. We offer on campus through the Office of Multicultural Resources, etc., all the different celebrations of different months. Gay and Lesbian History Month is October. There's Women's History Month. There's African American History Month. There's Latino Hispanic Month, etc. So all of those, there's going to be a speaker. There's going to be a movie. There's going to be a film fest. Go read a book. I mean, that's what the library is for. It's really very easy to reach out.
And it's one of the main reasons I love being at USF, because it's so big, so diverse. Every single country, religion, sexual identity, gender identity, ethnicity that you can think of, we have someone here. So if you just go out there, go to the Marshall Center or wherever and just meet people, you'll be so enriched. And that's what a crucial part of the college experience should be, right? Even identities or people who you might not otherwise interact with, college is the time to make that happen. And you'll be so much better for it. It'll expand your worldview so much.
Well, and also, completely sort of along with or separate from just being a better person, which we should all want to be, right?
Ideally.
And to get a good education, that's a good idea. It's also going to help you no matter what you do in your career, whether you're a stay-at-home parent, whether you're a real estate agent, a lawyer, you're going to encounter people who are different from you. If you want satisfied clients, good children, healthy schools, etc., you're going to be able to know about different people, or at least not freak out when you encounter difference.
Absolutely. And both of you make me think about, I hear the term the real world. When I think of USF, this is the real world. You experience things on this campus that you will experience when you go off of Fletcher, when you go off of Fowler or Bush, or the surrounding, our perimeters here.
Absolutely.
So, like you said, the world view. So we have a lot of great questions coming in. And Dr. Cruz and Dr. Wendland, this question speaks to something you both said. So what is the role of people with a privileged identity? If we're thinking about heterosexism or the intersections of identity, but what is the role of people who might be a cis male or a cis female?
The role, well, I would say it starts with the acknowledgement of that privilege, which doesn't happen by magic, right? It happens by reading about these things and educating yourself. And once you realize however many dimensions of privilege you have, if you want to do something about it, then you go meet the people with less privilege where they are and ask them questions and listen to them and ask them, how can I be helpful to you? What does your community need? What can I do to make that happen? And it's something connected to what he said earlier. Instead of us deciding for ourselves what you need, how about we go and ask them what they need, right? And whatever underprivileged group we're thinking of, it's more value to hear from them directly, to see what they need, so that we can come up with some sort of way to make that happen and not take over the project, but instead be helpful to them and hand in hand, as opposed to just listening and then taking over and this is how we're gonna do it. No, let's not only listen, but include, because that's the only way that the privilege, will balance out a little bit, if they're included and brought into these other spheres of power. What do you think?
I agree, and I think that one of the hardest lessons that I had to learn, because I'm an only child, I'm pretty self-assured, I'm a lawyer, so I like to take control of things, and one of the hardest lessons for me to learn was to shut up and leave. Like, just because I care about something, if it's not my particular identity, sometimes I need to just leave. So that means there are places that I don't go to, even though I teach women's studies and I teach feminist theory and stuff. There are some meetings that are for women, whatever that means. I don't identify as a woman, so I don't go to those things unless I'm invited. So I think it's asking what can be done, and sometimes just go tend your own garden for a little bit and let these folks handle their thing until they reach out to you. I think that's also an important thing, particularly when you're very passionate about other people and helping.
Absolutely.
And not be dismissive. Like, if a group of people comes to you and tells you there's this certain need they have, listen and take their word for it, because often you see that type of thing happening. They don't even know what they need. Look at what they're asking for. No, if that is what they say they are asking for, it's because that is what they need, and we must take their word and do something.
I think the key thing about this right now in our culture is the Black Lives Matters movement. I think it's being really misunderstood by a lot of people who aren't African American. And I don't see that misunderstanding as necessarily coming from a place of hate. I think it's coming from a place of just not understanding what the Black Lives Matter movement's supposed to be doing. It doesn't mean all lives doesn't matter, right? It means that right now, statistically, and anecdotally, in certain places in this country or across the country, there's just a higher risk prevalence issue for violence against African American people. And it doesn't mean that we can't look at other things too. It just means, hey, this is a thing that we can focus on right now, and we can all come together and really bring the Constitution and all our beliefs about our country to bear. I think it's the same thing about transgender issues or gay issues. People say, oh, gay people are just asking for special rights. Well, when you step back, a lot of the things that LGBT people are fighting for actually protect cisgender people, heterosexual people, asexual people, all people. So when you sort of release your own identity for a second, remember where you are, but try to imagine where these people are and listen, then you begin to circulate those ideas that can help all of us have a better society, for Frank.
Yeah,
lack of a better
empathy,
phrase.
you know, putting yourself in other people's shoes and trying to visualize yourself going through what they're going, right? You mentioned that it was similar to trans rights or gay rights, you know, like marriage equality passed, and of course we're super happy about it, but does that mean that gay citizens now have every single right that is afforded to straight citizens? No, it does not. You see, there are other things that need to be taken care of. There are many states in which you can still be fired just for being LGBT, you know? So listening to these important things that a lot of citizens don't have, so that you can do whatever you can to make those things happen, it's a powerful thing.
Yeah, it sounds like all people should be a part of this conversation, or conversations around social justice, regardless if you are in a privileged identity or a marginalized identity. All aspects of the spectrum, someone has something to learn from it. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to go to our next question.
Yeah.
Like I said, very, very good questions. So most universities do not ask questions about gender identity or sexual orientation as a part of their admissions forms. How can we encourage our administration at USF to do this in light of perceived barriers?
Well, one of the ways to do that is to understand the structure of how university and public education works in the United States. So some of those questions are asked not necessarily for USF, but for federal reporting. So one of the ways we can change that is not necessarily, well, in addition to putting pressure on the USF administration, is also to put pressure on our state legislators, et cetera, to change the way the Department of Education calculates statistics. In the same way that the US Census doesn't count gays and lesbians. It doesn't count sexual orientation at all. So we need to push that so that we can get that data. When we have that data, that produces other change. So one of the things, that's the great thing about a university, right? That's why you take social welfare classes and political science classes and classes in my department stuff, is that you learn how all of that works, which is much larger than just what I want at my university. This is a nationwide, federal and state level sort of problem that we need to address.
Yeah, and to echo what he said earlier, the power of the grassroots, right? The power of students getting together and making their voice heard, you know? If enough students realize the importance of this and organize in a way that cannot be ignored, then usually things happen a little quicker.
Perfect. So our next question comes from someone who says that they're really willing to learn, and this goes back to talking about trans students or just trans individuals. So is the goal of a trans person to eventually transition to another gender, or is being trans an identity in itself?
That's exactly what we were sort of discussing a few questions back. It depends on the person. So sort of the classic trans narrative, right, is I was born into this body, but I want to be in this body because I actually feel like I'm a woman or a man. And I have several trans friends who adhere to that, and they have had
That's
whatever.
their experience.
Exactly, that's their experience, and they want to be known as a woman or a man, and that's the end of it. That fits, that works. Okay. Other friends, I have another friend who was born in a female body and was raised as a female, and has now created a body and a persona and a life and an identity that's sort of masculine, but still delves into and is not afraid of his feminine past. He self-defines as genderqueer. Okay. Some people want to exist in that sort of space that's neither male nor female. Some want to definitely transition. So I think the question there is, again, rather than us answering, is when you encounter someone who identifies as trans, transgender, genderqueer, et cetera, it's just to let their story sort of come forth and not to work hard to place them. There's this really great t-shirt, I think, or a Facebook meme or something. It's like, you're walking down the street and you see someone whose gender you cannot determine. What should you do? A, stop worrying about it and go about your business. And that's really it seems sort of like quippy, but it's really the easy answer. Just deal with the person as an obvious, honest, authentic human being, and then their identity will come forth, just like any of our other identities.
Yes, certainly it depends on a case-by-case basis. There won't be one description or definition that will apply to every single trans individual. For many of them, yes. It's just that binary classic thing where they just want to be of the other, they feel like they're of the other gender, so they go through that. But some people not only want to live in the ambiguity, they thrive in it. And if that's where they feel comfortable, and if that's where they're happy, then again, it's about respecting their right to self-identify. So I wouldn't say it's the goal of every single trans person to fully transition, whatever that means. There are people like that, but there are other people who just feel more comfortable in a more ambiguous place, and that's perfectly fine too. If they're happy, great.
Awesome, thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left and still have some great questions.
Already? Wow.
I know, we're moving. So this next question is a great one. It seems that many people ignore the B in LGBT and regard bisexual individuals as promiscuous or consider this sexuality to be illegitimate in general. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there are several reasons. I feel like a lot of people who identify as full-on gay or full-on lesbian probably at some point in their lives identified as bisexual. That was my experience. I didn't quite feel comfortable coming out as full-on gay yet, so I started telling my friends I was bi, right? And then eventually I was like, no, I'm just gay, right? And I feel like that might happen to enough people where outsiders might start thinking that everyone who identifies as bi is going through that transition period to full-on homosexuality. When really, of course, that is not the case. Like we were saying earlier with the trans example, with the bi example, there are just people who genuinely feel attracted to both genders, and it's not a transitional thing, it's a permanent thing, and I feel like it's ludicrous to categorize them as promiscuous because in the end, people do what they want and with who they want, right? And it's not about that, it's about an identity. It shouldn't even be linked to activity or behavior or what you do or who you're with. Identifying as bisexual is not about that. It's about your own identification and the fact that you're expressing to the world that that's what you like. And if someone says that, who am I to not believe them? Again, I want to respect the right to self-identify, and I have several friends who are bi and they have been for years, and I don't think that's going to change.
Absolutely agree with that. So another question, what does identity mean to you?
That's a tough one because identity is sort of ambivalent. In one sense, it's something we hinge or connect or hook ourselves into, right, as a way of stabilizing ourselves and finding our place in the world, within ourselves and with our friends and in society. On the other hand, though, we know that identities can change, right? We can convert religions, we may change our sexual orientations, we may play with gender, we may all of the sorts of things that we do. So to me, I guess identity is just, I'm always afraid to say this because I always get in trouble for it, but to me it's never permanent. It's always in motion and it's always processed. And so one of my identities is sort of permanent. I'm always going to be a Kansan. I don't know, wherever I live, I'm always just going to be Kansan because I'm so connected, that's where I grew up. But then again, my sexual identity has changed. I also went through sort of a bisexual phase when I wasn't quite sure, etc. And right now I'm gay, but I don't know, I sort of begin to identify as queer sometimes, I don't know. So for me, identity is this thing that helps us wake up in the morning and know who we are that day, but if we put it too firmly into cement, it can sort of be a problem. So we want to be sure that it's, I don't know, what's the wording, quicksand or something, right? So that we understand that maybe tomorrow, because of a new experience, the next day, our identities can shift. It doesn't mean every day we wake up and, oh, today I'm this and tomorrow I'm that. It just means that it's our way through the world for now, but that it's also malleable.
Yeah, I very much agree. To me, identity is humanity. My humanity. My identity is my humanity. And if you've been in this world a couple of years, you know that you're not the same person you were 3 years ago or 1 year ago, you know? So that if your personality, the way you approach problems, the way you interact with people has evolved through the years, then I would take that as evidence that your identity also evolves through the years. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be certain aspects that never change, but some others will. So to me, my identity is what makes me human, and what makes me how I interact with people. It's very much linked to the rest, you know, and to the community. I think.
That kind of leads us to what will be our last question. We're 5 minutes out now. How about we all identify as human?
The sentiment is really wonderful. The city of Key West, Florida's city model is one human family. And we've seen the things on Facebook, all lives matter, and we see the things, we're just human, can't we just get along? Yes, we can in an ideal world. The simple fact is, though, that on a daily basis, in a very material way, we are not all just human. We are raced, classed, gendered, etc. We have decades of statistics about how that affects different people differently. We know that little gay and lesbian children have a higher suicide rate than children who do not identify as gay, lesbian, or otherwise non-normative, right? We know that certain lives are being taken in this country at different levels. We know that certain people live in poverty at different levels. And so with all of that data, that the idea that we're all simply human is a really wonderful goal, but that's just it. It's sort of a goal because on the daily basis, on the weekly basis, when we look at all of the stuff from childhood mortality rates to who's getting educated and who's not, and who's holding jobs and who's getting promoted and all of those sorts of things, we just simply know that although we are all human, we are all not the same type of human. And that is just the point of what all the researchers across the nation and across the world are doing, is trying to prove, one, that we have these differences, and two, how we can work together to change them and elevate us.
I think he put it wonderfully. Basically, yes, of course, we're all human, and in a perfect world, that would be the only thing that mattered, but our world is not perfect, so not acknowledging the differences would be a disservice to the people whose differences are making their life quality less so than others categories or people, and if we want to make the world a better place, we need to know what these differences are, see how we can use them for a positive effect as opposed for a negative one.
Can I give one example of
absolutely.
how I had a colleague at my last university who used a wheelchair, and we were basically at the same level, we had the same level of education, economically, etc. So in general, we were both human. But because my colleague used a wheelchair, my colleague had to go around the building to the back entrance of a building to get to the elevator to go to the classroom and office that she needed to access. I went through the front door. Now, on a just an individual instance basis, what is that? Maybe an extra 5 minutes of her life. But added up over the course of a day and a week and a month, factoring in weather, factoring in traffic, factoring in all the other things, it meant that her life was radically different from mine. In the course of a week, I had like an hour more time to do other things while she was struggling to go around to the back of the thing. So that's a case where we have two people who are really quite privileged in terms of economics and education and stuff, and yet our lives were really quite different when we were living them. And it's not always these huge differences, it's sometimes those daily differences that add up over time that help me remember that yes, of course we're all human, but our lives are not exactly the same.
I think that is an absolutely great example, and thank you both for sharing your personal life experiences. I think we learn best when we own our experiences, when we're able to articulate them to other people and give live examples. So again, thank you to both of our guests. I also want to thank our live audience and those who tuned in on campus or around the world, and definitely want to thank our production crew. That they were the reason why we were able to do this today. These are really important conversations to have. And like Dr. Wendland said and Dr. Cruz, everyone is welcome and should be a part of these conversations, regardless where you are as far as privilege or a marginalized identity. We need everyone to be a part of these conversations. So our next Real Talk is actually going to be at the end of October, and it's going to be focused on the politics or the state of politics in the United States. And I hope that you all join us for that. Again, we are live from the University of South Florida, and our motto is the best place to live, best place to work, and the best place to learn. Go Bulls.